Because of a beach renourishment project that's happening right here, nearly 270 sea turtle nests had to be moved about a quarter of a mile down the beach to this protected area. The turtles in here are being taken to a super secluded spot to be released. Most of these tires have been underwater for at least 40 years, where millions of gallons of that contaminated water is coming out of that pipe. And you might be left wondering, is it really that big of a deal? But it is a big deal at the recycling plant when things like this plastic bag gets caught up in the machine. Controlled burns don't just protect areas like this from wildfires. That's because about 1/3 of the people living in Florida are renters. Aircraft like this fighter jet takes off from in the middle of the ocean. One of the biggest issues is that people say smokers are using the beach as an ashtray. Just how big? Well, here's the size of me compared to it, to an area where hundreds of years of history will be right beneath our feet.
There it is. Oh, there it is.
But the ground is just so completely saturated that if it rains anymore, a tornado touched down in this Bradenton neighborhood. This wind and rain that you're seeing right now isn't even the biggest concern. More than 75% of all military sexual assaults are never even documented, like Jacob's case. There's still more than 1,000 people missing, a lot of them thought to be buried in this rubble. Here we go. It's hard to believe just a year ago, there was no one here. Now it's some of the busiest times the island has ever seen. So what is it that is drawing so many people to Anna Maria Island? Maybe it's the white sand. Or clear awful water. Maybe it's all the greenery and the old Florida feel. And Romania is where we began our 2-day journey to get to Kyiv, Ukraine. The country is roughly the size of Texas, and because of the war, airports are closed, so the only way in is to drive. This is what is left of a Russian tank. There's several of them along this road right here. And I had the unique opportunity to see some of it. I traveled to Norfolk to go behind the scenes with the Navy's Sailor for a Day program, and it was intense. This may just look like an old shell. It is. But it's being used to bring new life to an area of Tampa Bay. I'll show you how. This shell is part of 130,000 pounds of fossilized shells that are being scooped and bagged by Tampa Baywatch volunteers like Rick Powell.
It's a day at the gym, and I get a lot more out of it emotionally than I would at the gym.
What do you get out of it emotionally?
The feeling that I'm making a difference.
A difference that these shell bags will make once they're put on a boat and taken out to the small historical island that is eroding from being next to a shipping canal. This is Whiskey Stump Key. Right here, you can see how far the water comes up. The shell bags are going to help protect the island from further erosion.
What these are going to do is establish a substrate for oysters to settle on.
Richard Radigan is the Oyster Shell Program Coordinator for Tampa Baywatch. He says with the help of volunteers, they've put more than 700 artificial reefs and thousands of shell bags around the island to become a habitat for oysters that help clean the water and create a living barrier to protect the shoreline.
To maintain the whole estuary system, which maintains the whole life of Tampa Bay.
The island is a natural sanctuary for all kinds of creatures.
It's an important nesting ground for birds.
And helping the environment and wildlife is something that Powell says is worth every second.
Just being out in God's creation, floating with the tide, and just being one with nature does touch your soul.
In Hillsborough County, Wendi Lane, ABC Action News.
The amount of tragedy involved in this whole thing is unexplainable.
When Daria Cole and her husband left their quiet Mayaca City farm to visit Hungary, they had no idea that Hurricane Ian would flood their farm and threaten the lives of all of their animals.
I said, you have to save them. I am not there. You're all I have. Please save them.
This video shows how Daria's helpers used a floatable ATV to lead the horses out of the water using a bucket of food. They were saved, but not all the animals were as lucky.
We have dead animals here on this piece of property. We had animals on another piece of property.
The water has since receded, but the damage is done. Daria's husband showed me how the pigs that were once on the back of the property swam up to the front where they now are. But some of them didn't make it either. They lost about 20 animals. And they're not the only ones. Farmers all across eastern Manatee and Sarasota counties, they're all in the same boat, dealing with destroyed structures and buildings and dead farm animals. And right now, they're just trying to keep the animals that survived alive. But thankfully, there's help.
Here, I'll go up there.
Volunteers are donating their time and money to help the agriculture community. An ag supply hub has been set up at Dakin Dairy in Mayaca City, where trucks lined up to get hay donated by Amber Glen Feed of Pinellas County.
And as the water recedes, people think their emergency's over. And honestly, that's where it's pretty much just beginning for a lot of the ranchers and farmers.
Farmers like the Coles, whose feed and hay got wet and moldy in the flooding, say that help like this from so many caring people gives them the hope they need to get through.
Would like to thank the community for the support, and if we can do something for the community, we are here.
In Mayaca City, Wendi Lane, ABC Action News. The Gulf of Mexico. We know it for its salty aqua water, powdery sand, and that it's home to thousands of species of marine life. But beneath the surface, there's still so much we don't know. And scientists are finally learning how oil from more than a decade ago continues to impact it. On April 20th, 2010, a BP oil rig called Deepwater Horizon exploded 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana.
We continue the search and rescue case. The 11 people are unaccounted for.
11 people were killed, and the explosion triggered the biggest marine oil spill in global history.
All hell broke loose. There was so much unknown because there had never been a deep water blowout like that, a mile deep.
Oil gushed from the leak for 87 days before it was finally capped. A total of 5 million barrels of oil spilled into the Gulf, polluting the water, killing marine life, and causing America's largest environmental disaster. A disaster that still lingers in the Gulf more than 10 years later.
Currently, there's a substantial amount of that oil still in the environment.
BP was forced to pay $18.7 billion in fines, the largest corporate settlement in U.S. history. Most of that money going into something called the Restore Act to help the Gulf recover.
There was a lot of money that was made available to the academic community to study the long-term impacts.
For 10 years, USF Marine Science professor Stephen Morosky has headed the $40 million research program. This is the RV Weatherbird 2. It's basically a floating laboratory that USF scientists took out into the Gulf of Mexico to find out the long-term impact of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. This ship, the tool for that research. From testing the sediment all over the bottom of the Gulf and keeping a library of that tested sediment for future reference. You guys were researching the long-term impact. What are some of your findings?
Oil that's stranded in the deep bottom of the Gulf will not be landfilled by sequential sediment deposition for another 100 years.
Morosky says that oil on the bottom of the Gulf is still impacting marine life, especially in fish and dolphins near the spill site.
Even now, we see very low reproduction rates for those animals.
He says of all the fish they've studied in the Gulf, they still have yet to find one without traces of oil on it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that every single fish you guys pulled out had some kind of traces.
Correct. We analyzed over 2,000 fishes for their contamination with the most toxic components of oil, which are called PAHs. And every single one that we analyzed had a certain level of PAHs.
But despite all the tragedy, not all hope is lost. Things are being done to help. Money from the Restore Act is now making its way to coastal communities to help restore the Gulf.
This project is really exactly what the Restore money was intended for.
I rode out with Keith Colosso with the Hernando County Marine and Waterways Division, who is on a mission to help the Gulf.
Right off my bow, like 50 feet, you'll be good.
And out here 20 miles off the coast of Hernando County, that Restore Act money is helping projects like this, these artificial reefs that are being dropped into the water to create habitat for marine life.
What we see on the artificial reef structure is the fish populated within just a couple of weeks. And there's up to 30, 35 species of fish out here in the artificial reefs. Things like gag grouper, red grouper, Spanish mackerel, flounder. There's a whole gamut of what people come fishing for.
The fish mesmerizing. The man-made structures, an underwater menagerie for divers to explore. And while their program is creating an area for fish to thrive, an aquarium is using the money to help animals survive.
The Deepwater Horizon oil spill impacted a lot of marine life.
Abby Stone heads the Stranded program at Clearwater Marine Aquarium.
Essentially, we were awarded funds that helped to enhance our program.
Money from the Restore Act is used to help animals who are stranded on the beach, like when this pod of 5 pilot whales were stranded on Reddington Beach in 2019. And it's helped rescue dolphins like Rudy.
Hi, Rudy.
A resident rough-toothed dolphin who was found stranded on the beach, deaf and not able to return to the wild. A wild that is alive and vulnerable.
Given the importance of the ocean to us in Florida and people in the United States, we need to make more investments in our understanding of how ecosystems work.
Scientists say the silver lining is now they know more about oil spills than ever before. But what they know even more is that continuing to protect our precious Gulf is something we can't afford not to do.
The interesting thing about oil spills in general is given enough time, the ecosystem will recover. It's just that we now know that the recovery times range from, a few months to decades, maybe even centuries.
Wendi Lane, ABC Action News.